Hey, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning, Sunday Fellowship. We're only a couple of weeks out from Christmas, a couple of weeks out for the end of 2020, going into 2021. If you have access to the email, I guess I said that last night, that you read yesterday in the email. But we've got a line of speakers coming in the next couple of weeks. I think Curtis is speaking next week. We have Dwight speaking the week after that. Our dear brother David Griffin is supposed to do the message for us on the Sunday after Christmas. So we've got some pretty interesting topics and speakers coming in the next several weeks. Most of them you know. I think all of them, all of the speakers that are coming up the rest of the month, you'll know. So I'm just glad that the Father's opening up the message to have others begin to share and begin to speak those things that He's revealing to us in the process, in the mystery of sonship. So one of the things we talk about, and which we're going to talk about today, is the cross. There's a lot of discussion on the cross. Everybody talks about the cross based on what they heard in religion. I talk about the cross as though Jesus dying on the cross was the whole thing in a nutshell. My microphone's not working again. It's probably because it's in my pocket. Okay. Thank you, Jim. So we talk about the cross, as I said, I think last week. One dear brother I know says Jesus died, he was buried, and he rose on the third day, and that's all I know. He's a pastor. But it's a lot of preachers and people in religion and Bible teachers and theologians only go to that part of the cross that makes sense. What we've been taught all our lives about the cross is subject to religious interpretation. If you're a Catholic, the cross means this. Jesus is still on it. If you're evangelical, the cross is this. Jesus is not on it. He was raised and he's sitting at the right hand of the throne of God. So we got a lot of different understandings and knowledge about the cross. So today we're going to go into a part of the cross that you might not, well, you being with us, you might have heard this, but for those of you who haven't heard, we're going to discuss a part of the cross today. And if I get time, I'm going to say something about the cross at the very end that the Father gave me this morning when I was in the shower. It's not in the notes. It's not in part of the message. It's something He popped in my understanding this morning that I'm going to say at the end of the meeting if we have the time. If not, I'll wait and bring it to you later on. But I trust the Father will have time. So with that, we'll get started with the message today.
The cross, its mystery, absolute power, absolute authority and power. 2 Corinthians 5:19, to wit, that God was in Christ, reconciling the world unto himself, not imputing their trespasses unto them, and hath committed unto us the word of reconciliation. Today we are going to talk about the cross. Not just any cross, but the cross of Christ, or the cross of Jesus Christ. Usually, when many talk about or discuss the cross, it's in the light of sin, and not just any sin, but the sin of man or the sins of mankind. But why sin? For some, it's a heaven or hell issue. Without the cross, everyone would definitely go straight to hell. There would be no forgiveness. To others, the cross is a bridge to allow men to come to God. This bridge of the cross has the ability to provide a way over the great chasm of sin, which has separated man from God. And finally, to some, the cross is justice for what men have done in the world concerning sin and sins. The cross has been compartmentalized in the minds of men to solely fix Adam's sin, to fix the fall of man, and to give him a way back to God. The mystery of the cross.
Okay, that's good. Let me interject just a little bit on that. That's when, and as Catherine was reading that, I was going through my mind. That is the common idea of what we see the cross as and taught in most churches. Not that that's wrong. I'm not saying at all that those ideas and things aren't wrong, because it is true, and a lot of that is true to a certain degree. So it's not wrong to have that idea. But there's something, it's just like saying I'm a Christian. Well, if you've been born again, that's true to a certain extent. But as we talked about last week and the week before, that's kind of misleading. Anybody can be a Christian, subjectively, based on where you grew up, how you grew up, what you thought, the household you were in, what kind of church you went to, how many times you were baptized. So all of those things are part of an idea. So this idea about the cross that Catherine just got through reading for us, is the common idea of what we see. It's about fixing Adam's sin. It's about fixing his sin and the fall of man. Now, I want to say this for those of you who have not heard it. Biblically, there is no place in the Bible that says man fell. None. We say that because that's part of the idea. Well, the fall of Adam, where's that found? You won't find that. The only place that, and it's in the notes today, the only place you see anything about falling is Jesus in Luke chapter 10 that he says, I beheld Satan fall as lightning from heaven. I beheld Satan fall. I don't find, at least in my Bible, if you get a copy of it, if you find that in yours, please send me a copy of it or just email me the passage and the translation you use because I like to read that too. But there is no such thing as man fell. Because God is not trying to fix us. You see, if you follow the idea that Adam fell and God had to do something about it, you're saying his first plan didn't work. So he had to have a second plan to redeem the first plan so that his plan would work. But that's not the truth. The truth is we don't understand the cross. The cross has a mystery associated with it. The cross has absolute authority to flow out of that mystery and the power to accomplish whatever is in that mystery, which we will see today. So let's continue to read.
I know what I'm about to say may sound somewhat off to some, but what is the verse that says man fell or used the term fall of man? Or how about this? The cross covered sin, or the cross covers sins, or the cross covers sins. Although many use these terms, they are not written in our Bible. You see, the cross is a mystery hidden in God before the foundation of the world. And that also makes sin a mystery hidden in God before anything was created. Also, let's not forget death, which is produced by sin, is again a mystery. We have not been told by well-meaning men and brethren that the cross they proclaim is a mystery hidden in God. Ephesians 1:4, according as he hath chosen us in him before the foundation of the world, that we should be holy and without blame before him in love. 1 Corinthians 2:7, but we speak the wisdom of God in a mystery, even the hidden wisdom, which God ordained before the world unto our glory.
Let's pause. Let me pause just 1 second on that. No one addresses the cross as a mystery. Because we can see because it's a part of history, therefore we can look back and we can see that history, and that's the sum total of our understanding of the cross. But the cross is a mystery. That makes sin a mystery. That also makes death a mystery, which we'll get into, I trust the Father, as we continue on. But you're going to see today, at least we're going to set before you today, that the mystery that's in the cross is powerful. It's a mystery. And believe it or not, with all that we know, all we've been told, it is still a mystery today. The cross is still a mystery. Because if we understand the mystery of the cross, we can understand spiritual birth. And if we can understand spiritual birth, we can understand our identity in sonship as a spiritual son of God, as the spiritual son of God. So let's keep going.
This is where the cross was established by the Godhead, before the action of creation took place. This is where the cross received absolute power, authority, and power to destroy both sin and death. Because the mystery of the cross is not known or taught, sin has something to do with man specifically. As I said above, if the cross is a mystery, then sin and death are both mysteries as well. So, what then is the mystery of sin? The mystery of sin is what God calls sin and not man. God knows and calls sin a person. Yes, sin is the name and identity of a person to God the Father. And an even bigger mystery, he created this person of sin. As a matter of fact, the first time sin is used in the Bible, God identified sin as a person who he would have the power over. Who would have the power over man. Genesis 4:7. You will be accepted if you do what is right, but if you refuse to do what is right, then watch out. Sin is crouching at the door, eager to control you, but you must subdue it and be its master. Genesis 4:7. If thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted? And if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door, and to thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him. Another translation, if thou doest well, will not thou countenance look up with confidence? And if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door, and unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him.
Now, I put those different translations in there for a reason, because I wanted you to get a flavor of two things. First, as God is speaking to as God is speaking to Cain, he's referring to sin and as a person. Sin, and he's also saying not only is sin a person, sin lieth at the door, but it says his desire, which gives us an identity and a power of that person waiting to pounce on you. It's a person waiting to pounce on you. When the last time you heard somebody talk about sin as a person? We talk about sin as though it has to do with man. We talk about sin as though it has to do with something with man. It really has to do with the person who's trying to take advantage or capture or take hostage man. And so God is saying to one of Adam's firstborn sons, or at least his firstborn of two, the twins, his desire. Sin is a person, and in this case, in all the translations, if you looked it up in the Hebrew, which I did, this is a feminine noun, a masculine noun, and a feminine noun, an effeminate noun. Sin and his desire are both nouns, names of a person. So it's no issue to God that he knows what he's talking about. So when God uses the word sin, he's not talking about an action. He's not talking about a deed that men do. He's talking about a person that comes upon you and does something to you. But God tells Cain something else. Thou shalt rule over him, which means you have authority over the person of sin if you don't walk in your flesh. If thou countenance is well, thou do well. If not, if thou doest not well, in other words, if you get upset, get angry, there's somebody waiting to take advantage of you. Somebody wait to take you hostage. And that's sin. Sin is a person. From that, remember this. I told you a second ago, the cross is a mystery. Well, this is the first understanding of the mystery of the cross. This is really not, it's a second, but it's the first that we're using today. We'll get back to when he used it for the first time. But sin is a mystery because it started before the foundation world. This person of sin was created. Let me say it again. The person of sin was created by God. He was not created as sin. He was created as someone else, and he exchanged his identity in a specific time in eternity, in a specific time in the spirit. So let's go on to the next portion of reading, please.
The apostle confirming this in his epistle when he said in 1 John 3:12, not as Cain, who was of the wicked one.
Now listen to what it says. Not as Cain, who was of who? The wicked one. Sin. It's the devil or Satan, which we'll get to in a minute. But God is specific. John is specific here. He's saying something that we should pay attention to. Keep going.
And murdered his brother. And why did he murder him? Because his works were evil and his brothers righteous. Another translation, we should not be like Cain, who was of the evil one and murdered his brother. And why did he murder him? Because his own deeds were evil and his brothers righteous. Then we have Jesus saying this, John 8:44, you belong to your father, the devil, and you want to carry out your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning, not holding to the truth, for there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks his native tongue, for he is a liar and the father of lies. If thou doest, Genesis 4:7, if thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted. And if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door, and to thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him.
That's what Jesus said. And you would do the desires of your father. See, if you want to carry out your father's desire, he's talking about the same person. He's talking about the same person. Jesus is referring to the same person as God the Father was back in Genesis 4:7 when he said, sin lieth at the door and his desire. That's what Jesus just said to the Jews standing there in this dialogue between him and the Jews. The desires of your father. He was a murderer from the beginning. Well, you heard Catherine read 1 John chapter 3, where it says, not as Cain, who was of the wicked one, and who did what? Kill or slew his brother. So all of this really is part of that mystery. We treat sin, again, as though it's an action versus a person. Yes, there is an action. Those actions are called works, which we'll get to in a minute. But those works are not man in itself. It is a person working in and through that man. Keep going, please.
God the Father gave us the identity of the person of sin from the beginning. This identity was given to Adam's oldest twin son, Cain. Yet earlier in the garden, God told Adam about the works of the person of sin would be death. Remember this? Genesis 2:17. But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it, for in the day that thou eatest of, thou shalt surely die. What does Adam know about sin or death? Nothing. But he will later. So the mystery is hidden in God. That is hidden in God is that sin is a person with an identity, with a personal identity, which we will discuss later. And the person of sin is a he. Please keep in mind that sin was known as a person before the foundation of the world. More on this in a few minutes. But who else knew that sin was a person? As stated above, Jesus did. But Paul weighed in on sin as being a person too. Paul's revelation of Christ opens eyes to see what others didn't or couldn't see. Paul knew sin was a person and that his sin, power of death, was destroyed in the person of Christ by the mystery of the cross. Paul said this, Romans 5:12-13. Wherefore, as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin.
Pause. Let's look at this for just 1 second. Wherefore, as by one man sin entered the world. So that should tell her. What did that tell you? What does it tell you, Curtis? What does it tell you? Catherine, what does it tell you? Sin was already there before the disobedience of Adam. Sin was already there before the disobedience of Adam. What does it say? Wherefore, as by one man sin entered. So he had to be there already to do what? Enter. And God breathed into his nostrils and man became. What was he before? Man became a living soul. So body and soul were there. It became. This says sin entered. So it was something that made sin before This person had to be there before the disobedience. Keep reading.
By one man's sin, sin entered into the world, and death by sin. And so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned. For until the law, sin was in the world, but sin is not imputed when there is no law.
Now pause. I need to add something to this. That's verse 13. For until the law, sin was in the world, but sin is not imputed where there is no law. Now, Paul made a statement here that most don't realize, most don't understand. When people reading this verse, most think about Mount Sinai, the Ten Commandments. There was a law before the Ten Commandments. There was a law before. That's how sin, which we will read later on here, but this is where sin had the opportunity to enter. For until the law, sin was in the world, but sin is not imputed where there is no law. Well, Adam had a law. Thou shalt not eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, for the day thou shalt eat of it, thou shalt surely die. Why? Because sin is going to enter and death will take hold of you. Now, remember, sin and death, what he said in verse 12, sin entered the world and death by sin. Keep that in mind. That's a powerful statement. Sin entered the world. Think about that. That's a third dimensional statement. Death, in this case, is coming in third dimension. It's being revealed. So, the law, in this case, is thou shalt not eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The first sin that was committed by man was a sin of disobedience. It was disobedience that caused sin to enter into the world. And then, of course, death by sin, and that death passed upon all men. We won't go into that, hopefully. If I get a chance, we'll discuss that just a little bit. Go ahead, please.
Romans 5:21, that as sin hath reigned unto death, even so might grace reign through righteousness unto eternal life by Jesus Christ our Lord.
It says sin reigned. What does that mean? It had complete authority. It means no one here could control it. Once it entered, it was a virus that spread among all men. There was an access point that was established in disobedience. That access point caused it to spread throughout mankind. Keep going. It reigned.
Romans 6:6-7, knowing this, that our old man is crucified with him, that the body of sin might be destroyed, that henceforth we should not serve sin. For he that is dead is freed from sin. 2 Corinthians 5:21, for he hath made him to be sin for us, who knew no sin, that we might be made the righteousness of God in him.
Let me say something about that verse just quickly. I saw this years ago. A father revealed this years ago. I was reading this verse back in the 80s, and as I was reading, the Spirit said to me, do you understand what you're reading? And of course, I said, well, yeah, it had to do with Christ. God made Christ to be sin for us, that he knew no sin, that we may be made the righteousness of God in him. I mean, yes. He said, read that again. I read it again. I still didn't see what he was saying. I read it a third time, and he opened my eyes to see. God has made him to be a person of sin for us, in a body, who knew no sin. In other words, he was not, his spirit was the Spirit of God. The Godhead was it. So that's not where his union was. That we might be made the righteousness of God in him. The body of sin was, he had a body of sin, but he did not have a sinning body. But what my interest point here, or inference point, is God made his son to be a person for us. That person is who we are. That's why when we get to, later on, we get to 2 Corinthians 5:14, that says, the love of Christ has strengthened us, that we does judge that one died for all died. This is what that means. This is where this enters in. It's a person. Always has been a person. But it took a person to end another person. We'll get to this. Hopefully we'll get to this at the end, because there's some things I saw in this morning that I didn't add to the notes because I didn't see it till today. Keep going, please. I'm sorry.
1 Corinthians 15:56. The sting of death is sin, and the strength of sin is the law.
Now the strength of sin is the law. Thou shalt not eat of all the trees in the garden. Thou shalt eat except the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The day thou shalt eat of it, thou shalt surely die. Thou shalt surely die. The sting of death is sin, and the strength of sin is the law. So anytime there's a law, there is a you you just increase the ability of sin when you're under the law. You will, anytime you're in your flesh, you're under the law, because there's a law in your body. Paul said, I see another law in my members, warring against the law of my mind. So it's not I that sin, but sin that dwelleth in my member. When you're in your flesh, you're under the law. When you're under the law, you're dealing with sin. Come on, let's keep going.
There are many more verses that could be used to confirm knowledge of sin being a person and that Christ became that person. Absolute authority of the cross. Think about that for a second. Had they known, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. But how could they have known anything? Because it was a mystery hid in God before anything or anyone was created. This hidden knowledge of the cross gives the cross absolute authority over sin and death. The word absolute means total and complete, having no restriction, exception, or qualification. The word authority in the Greek, exousia, power, authority, right, liberty, jurisdiction, strength.
That word in the Greek is exousia. It's also the word power, but it also means right. For instance, the first verse there is John 1:12. As many has received him, to them gave he the exousia, or the right to become the sons of God, even to them that believe on his name. The right, so authority is the right. So Christ gave, it's called in here, as many as believed in him, him being the word in this case in John chapter 1, gave every human being the authority by God. You have the authority to become another person. You have the authority by Christ to become another person. So that word exousia means right, the absolute right. Now, I haven't got to the word absolute, but the authority is the right, or the liberty, the freedom, which means you don't have to. The absolute liberty, the absolute jurisdiction or strength to become. Okay, keep going.
John 19:10 through 11. Then saith Pilate unto him, Speakest thou not unto me? Knowest thou not that I have power to crucify thee?
The authority.
And have power to
The
release
authority.
thee? Jesus answered, Thou couldst have no power at all against me, except it were given thee from above.
That's a powerful statement. Listen to what Jesus just said. You have the jurisdiction here. You have the strength to crucify here. But you wouldn't have that except it was given you from above. Which means no matter who's in charge where you are, at work, in church, in politics, in your state, no matter who it is given from above. It is given from above. Their authority, their strength, their jurisdiction does not come from man, it comes from God. Go ahead. Let's go to the next verse, please.
Romans 13:1 through 2. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation.
Now, the word, again, is authority here. We're using the word authority, but that's the Greek word exousia, which means authority, which means jurisdiction, which means strength. He says, Paul is saying that the higher authorities, higher than what? Higher than you. If you have children, you are the higher authority to them. If you have grandchildren, you are higher authority to them. There is no authority but of God. In other words, there's nobody in control. There's nobody in power on the planet in creation, including angels, but God. None. And if you do have a person in power, you do have somebody over you that you're not dealing with, or somebody that's working with you, or somebody that has some control and say over the things you can and cannot do, it says they have that authority given by God. Now, that might not sound good to you because you haven't struggled with the people. If you're working well with the people over you, that's okay. But if you have people around you, or a senator or a congressman or a president, whoever you talk about, they're fulfilling a purpose that God intended for them to fulfill, whether we understand that in the flesh or not. There's some things we need to understand about this, but there's some things I want you to see about the word authority in the word power in this verse. Keep going, please.
The definition tells us that the cross is without limits and total and complete over everything in creation. Why? It was established before creation, before sin and death, before the angels and man. Everything was created under the absolute authority of the cross.
Ooh, that's good. Think about that. If God ordained the cross before the foundation of the world, then the authority of the cross is absolute when the world was created. It was already there. So it's under its authority before we were created. Think about this. How many people, how many churches actually tell people, do you know the cross was ordained before the world began? When God created the world, the power and authority of the absolute authority of the cross was already in effect? Nobody talks about that. So that tells us that sin was not the issue when it came about. It was already taken care of. It was created under the absolute authority of the cross. He could not escape, and there's a reason for that. Oh my God, there's a reason for that. Keep reading.
1 Peter 1:19 through 20. But with the precious blood of Christ, a lamb without blemish or defect, he was chosen before the creation of the world, but was revealed in these last times for your sake.
Well, wait a minute. But the precious blood of Christ, a lamb without blemish or defect, he was chosen when?
Before the
That's
creation
the
of the
cross.
world.
There's a death of a person on that cross before creation. Maybe we didn't understand that. I had a preacher. He's a doctor. He was a pastor of a church. We went on a mission trip together. And I said this is back in 2007. I said this to him. We were talking in the car going to somewhere we were going at the time. And I mentioned this to him. And I said, yeah, the lamb was slain before the foundation of the world. And he said, oh, no, it wasn't. Pastor. Th.D. Big church. He looked at me and said, oh, no, David. No. I said, well, how do you read 1 Peter then? He said, well, that doesn't mean that he did not see it. And you can't give anybody something you don't see. You can't give anybody something you don't have. This is a part of the absolute authority of the cross. This is the part that men cannot grapple with, because if you can't see this, then spiritual birth does not have the same meaning in the world. To you, can't be. Because this is a mystery. Just like spiritual birth is a mystery. Sonship is a mystery. I must be getting stirred up. I'm talking loud. Go ahead, please.
The power of the cross. This verse in 1 Peter reveals the absolute authority of the cross occurring before the foundation of the world, and also the revealing of its power. The word power in the Greek means dynamis.
Dunamis. Dynamis.
dynamis, strength, power, ability, inherent power, power residing with a thing by virtue of its nature, or with a person or thing exerts and puts forth. As we can see from the definitions above, the cross has the absolute right and the ability or power residing within it to fulfill the Father's purpose, intent, and plan. The cross removes anything and everything into a new depth, which gives all of humankind the decision to become another person spiritually to Him, the spiritual sons and Son of God by new birth. Because
Hold on, Jim. Go back up just a little right there. Let me read that again. So I want to read that again. Just the last. It says the cross removes anything and everything into a new death. I should have underlined that. I should have highlighted that. A new death, not the one that came by sin. Remember, the cross was before the foundation of the world. So it has authority over anything after creation. So the death that came after creation was under the authority of the cross, which killed it, which we'll see in a minute. It destroyed it, which we'll see in a minute. There's a new death. God provided a new death for the old death, or the death from the first death was under subjection to the second death, if you want to say the second being the cross. Please keep reading.
because of the hidden mystery, absolute authority and power of the cross before creation, there is complete and total forgiveness, the freedom from the power.
Wait. There's complete and total forgiveness. Why? Because it had absolute authority before there was anything to forgive. So when it appeared, which is Revelation 12:8 says, as a lamb slain from, I didn't put that verse in there. I should have put it in there. I'm sorry. There's the lamb slain from the foundation of the world, or since the world began. Both of those mean the same. From and since mean the same thing. There's a starting point. And from the time of creation, the cross was at work but had not yet appeared, which Peter says, who is now manifested in these last times, in these last days. So total forgiveness. What else?
The freedom from the power of the person of sin.
Now, the freedom from the power. I put the freedom from I was going to say the power of sin altogether, but Paul said it that way. But I'm saying it this way, so you'll understand the thought process that's going on. Freedom from the power of the person of sin, which you will see in a minute how this fits. The person of sin. The cross took care of the person of sin even before the person of sin existed. That's why when we say people get upset, I've said it, I think Curtis said once, not too long ago, he said, when I say forgiveness, there's not a sin issue, people get upset. Well, I think we were talking about that at breakfast when him and I and Bruce and David, I think we were talking about this recently. But people get upset when we say things like God doesn't have a sin issue because he understands the mystery. It's his mystery. So when we say God doesn't have a sin issue, people get all twisted because they're locked under the law of sin and death. Keep reading.
Access to God and the absolute person of love he is.
Right.
All of this was made available before creation.
Now, wait a minute. All of it was made available when? Before creation, because the cross, the mystery of the cross, is absolute authority and power. It took place before creation. Keep going, I'm sorry.
So he didn't ask for anyone's permission.
Oh, you mean God didn't have to ask us? He didn't have to ask you, Curtis. What do you think about that, brother? He didn't have to ask you, Curtis. Do you think I ought to do this? Jenny, can you wrap your mind around this? Do you think, what do you guys think? Should I do this? He didn't ask for anybody's help. He didn't ask for your help. He didn't ask if you should do it. He wasn't concerned about your sin. He wasn't even concerned because it already taken care of. Don't mean you didn't do it. Don't mean there wasn't consequences. But there was something at play that you and I could not see because it was a mystery to us. Had they known, we'll get to that in a minute. Had they known, but they didn't know. They couldn't know because it was hid in God. He's going to put an end to it. The end was already in effect even before creation. Sin, the person of sin, not the issue. Even the death that sin brings. But let's keep going.
But now, through the mystery of the cross, humankind has access to the mystery of sonship. Let's look at a few verses that reflect the result of the cross of Christ. Luke 4:36. And they were all amazed and spake among themselves, saying, What a word is this! For with authority and power he commandeth the unclean spirits, and they came out. And they come out. A new death, which removed the first. This too is in the mystery of the cross. Nothing or anything survived the death of the cross.
Let me say this. I was talking at breakfast like a couple of weeks ago with Curtis and Dwight. Nothing. You've heard me. Those of you who've been with us for a while, you already know this. But I'm going to say it again for those of you who may be catching this on YouTube for the first time or you've not heard it this way before. Nothing survived the cross. It could not because it had absolute authority and power over creation. So when creation come along, it was created under the absolute authority and power of the cross. There was a death that had not yet been revealed. It made the playing field level. There are no blacks in Christ. There are no blacks that the cross didn't take care of. There are no whites. There are no Jews. There are no Gentiles. There are no males. There are no females. Everything that was created by God fell under the authority of the cross, including angels. Because had they known, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. We don't see that depth. We do not allow that depth to grasp us. That's a revelation that if it ever took hold of you, your walk in sonship would be completely, I don't want to use the word different, but it would be completely exchanged. Not changed, but exchanged. Keep going, please.
2 Corinthians 5:14 through 15. For the love of Christ constraineth us, because we thus judge that if one died for all, then all are dead.
Who died? Who died?
All.
What one? Christ. That if one died for all died. Who's the one? Christ. Where'd he die? On the cross. When he got on the cross, that which was done prior to creation met in third dimension and was manifested and made the playing field level. It gave everybody the right at that moment to do something they couldn't do, exchange identity, become another person. Keep going.
And that he died for all, that they which live should not henceforth live unto themselves, but unto him which died for them and rose again. Hebrews 2:9, but we see Jesus, who was made a little lower than the angels for the suffering of death, crowned with glory and honor, that he, by the grace of God, should taste death for every man.
Who's that leave out?
Nobody.
And it also said his suffering for the suffering of death. Now, we can talk about the suffering of the cross. That's where it took place. But death was a part of that. Death was that suffering. That he, by the grace of God, should taste death for every man. The cross, everything was under the authority, absolute authority and power of the cross. No man, no human, past, present, or future, is not taken care of at the cross. No sin is not taken care of at the cross. I have good Christian brothers who I know wrote books. No, the brethren. They don't see that. Their books always deal with something to do with the law and something to do with men and something to do with anything else with sin, but they do not understand the mystery and the absolute authority and power of the cross. Keep going. Get to 2:10.
For it, death, became him.
Now listen to that. It, and I added that. The verse 10 says, for it became him. I added the word death so you'll understand what went on in verse 9. For it, the death became him. Well, how could it be anything else but what? A person. God has made him to be sin for us. And at the same time, if death comes out of sin, both are nouns. For death became him, for whom are all things and by whom are all things, and in bringing many sons to glory, and make the captain of their salvation. Well, I'm sorry, the King James says captain. Make perfect the leader of their salvation through suffering. What sufferings? Death. I'll read it. Go up, Jim, please. Hebrews chapter 2, verse 14. Wherefore, for as much then as the children are partakers of flesh and blood, he also himself likewise took part of the same, that through death, a person, he might destroy him that had the power of death, that is the devil. So, this takes us back to Genesis. Someone had the power of death that was not God. There was a death that God didn't bring forth, but since the cross was a mystery before the foundation of the world, this death, the person of this death, sin, who manifests death by one man sin into the world and death by sin, this death, he was destroyed, and the power he had over humankind was done away with. Through death, Christ's death, the death of the cross, that he might destroy him, sin, that person, that had the power of death, that is, and he identifies with a personal pronoun, the devil. I'll put this other verse, I'll use the same verse twice. Hebrews 2:14, because the children are human beings. That's what the translation said. I really like that. Because the children are human beings made of flesh and blood, the Son, that's what the translation said. I did not add that. The Son also became flesh and blood. For only as a human being could he die, and only by dying could he break the power of the devil of sin, that person of sin, which is the devil is the personal pronoun, who had the power of death. Man, that's a powerful. I love that translation. Romans 6:9. Knowing this, Christ being raised from the dead died no more. Death has no more dominion over him. Why? Because it was destroyed by the mystery of the cross. Power of sin. Now, this is my closing parts here. Power of sin. Let me read this verse for you for a second. Well then, should we conclude that we Jews are better than others? No, and then Paul is talking, and he's talking to Rome, the Jews in Rome. So when he says we, he's talking about himself and the other Jews that he was writing to. That's why I'm telling you, Rome was written to Jews, not to Gentiles. No, not all. We also already shown that all people, whether Jew or Gentiles, are under the power of sin, under the power of this person. Romans 6:7. For when we died with Christ, we were set free from the power of what? Wait a minute. So you telling me Christ's death has set me free from the power of sin? Yes. But that doesn't make sense. Don't I sin? We'll get to that in a minute. Keep reading. Unless Paul made a mistake, the mystery and absolute authority and power of the cross is misunderstood. I encourage you to receive this so you'll understand what Paul is saying. The Spirit wants you to know here. The power of sin was done away at the death of Christ because the person of sin was destroyed. Keep going. Yes, please.
Romans 6:10 through 11. When he died once to break the power of sin. But now that he lives for the glory of God. So you also should consider yourselves to be dead to the power of sin and alive to God through Christ Jesus. Romans 6:14. For sin shall not have dominion over you. For ye are not under the law, but under grace. Romans 6:22. But now you are free from the power of sin and have become slaves of God. Now you do those things that lead to holiness and result in eternal life. Romans 7:9. At one time I lived without understanding the law, but when I learned the command not to covet, for instance, the power of sin came to my life. Romans 8:2. And because you belong to him, the power of the life-giving Spirit has freed you from the power of sin that leads to death. 1 Corinthians 15:56. The sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the law.
Keep going. That's it? Okay. I wanted to explain some of this and some of these verses to you a little more, but I want to be able to, as I close, I want to be able to add what the Father gave me this morning when I was in the shower. All he gave me, I gave to you. Most of all that he gave me, I gave to you because I didn't have the time to put it all down. So I didn't use Revelations 12, Revelations 13 and 8, which says the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. That has to do with what Peter talked about in 1 Peter. From means from and since are both the same because it has a starting point. That the Lamb slain from or since the foundation of the world gives us the idea that Peter said in his epistle and was manifest at the last day or the last times. But something I noticed this morning as I was meditating on this and looking to talk to you guys today about this message. The mystery of the cross and the absolute power and authority that comes with the cross is death. The cross does not give life. The cross cannot give life. It was never intended to be life. There is no life in it. It is death. But it's a death that comes through the Father. It's a death that comes through God. It provides an opportunity to take out anything that was under it in creation, including everything in fourth dimension and third dimension. But the cross does not give life. And I didn't think about that. I didn't think about it that way. As I heard this morning, it is death. It was part of the purpose, intent, and plan of God the Father to do exactly that. Bring forth his kind of death at a specific time. What that death does is something that no other death can do. This is a death to life. It doesn't give life, but it gives you and I access to life. That life is a life of the person that produced the death. Sin that produces death does not provide any life at all. It can't. It's a death unto death. But the cross is a death for an opportunity to be free so that you can make a decision to become another person spiritually and have the life of the Son. Life as the Son. I shouldn't say life of, life as the Son. So I wanted to say that about the cross. It is a place of death, not life. The resurrection is a part of that, but that's not what the cross was there for. It was there to put an end to everything, to put a blanket on everything under creation, both fourth dimension and third dimension. That includes angels. That includes the devil. Now, most of us don't understand that. Most people won't understand. Most preachers won't understand. Go to any church this morning in the country, in America, here in Texas, you won't find many people at all knowing what we're saying to you today. I'm quite sure some sitting there might have that sitting in them spiritually, but they're not being taught that. So it's kind of muted within most people. But the cross is God's death to make men free, to have access to him, to become another person spiritually to him, which is the spiritual Son of God, which you are if you receive Christ and become born from above. Thank you, guys. I trust the Father that he'll allow the Holy Spirit to renew your mind about the mystery, absolute authority, and power of the cross. Next Sunday, I think Brother Curtis is coming with absolute, what was that? Not absolute love. I'm sorry. It's adoption, the lie. I think it's called Adoption, the Lie, Part 2. Yeah, I think it is. Anyway, he'll be able to give you all that when you look at his notes for next weekend. God bless you guys. I trust the Father will see you. Have a safe and Merry Christmas in case we don't see you before then. With that, Jim, thank you, brother.